Let me tell you something interesting about silence in the digital age. We live in a world where almost everything is shared. Birthdays, morning coffees, sunsets, laughter, even pain dressed up in filters. And yet, some people remain invisible. They scroll quietly, observe deeply, but rarely, if ever, post. You might even know someone like that. Maybe you are someone like that. And that simple question always lingers in the air. Why? Why would anyone choose to stay unseen in a world obsessed with visibility? It's easy to assume they're just shy or introverted, but that's not the full story. Beneath that quiet behavior lies an entire psychology, one that reveals a lot about self-perception, human nature, and the subtle rebellion against a culture that never stops performing. For some people, silence isn't emptiness. It's control. The quiet power to choose what the world doesn't get to know. Because whether we admit it or not, social media has reshaped how we define ourselves. It rewards display. It praises noise. But those who stay in the shadows often see things most clearly. They observe without interrupting. They think before reacting. They analyze before judging. And psychologists have found something fascinating. People who post less often score higher on traits like self-restraint, introspection, and emotional independence. They're less influenced by comparison and external validation. They're not trying to prove who they are. They're trying to understand it. And in a world drowning in performance, that's rare. Because let's be honest, most of what we post isn't pure communication. It's identity crafting. A subtle audition for belonging. Every caption, every photo, every update whispers, "This is who I am." Do you approve? But when you stop posting, something changes. You start detaching your worth from digital applause. You stop thinking in captions. You begin living in the moment, not for the lens, but for yourself. That's the secret behind many people who don't post. They crave authenticity in a space where everything feels staged. They don't hate social media, they just can't find themselves in it anymore. It's not about rejecting technology. It's about refusing to compress life into highlights. Because once you see how easily perception can be shaped, you start valuing what can't be posted. Silence, depth, imperfection, truth. For some, the choice not to post comes after emotional burnout. Maybe they once shared everything, until one day it stopped feeling real. They noticed that each beautiful moment they shared created pressure to keep outdoing the last. They weren't living anymore. They were performing. So they quit. Quietly. No announcement. Just a slow disappearance from the feed. But here's what most people misunderstand. Not posting doesn't mean not feeling. It doesn't mean they don't care. It often means they care deeply. About presence, meaning, and protecting what's sacred. There's a term in psychology called psychological ownership. That feeling that something truly belongs to you. A thought, a memory, an experience. And when you post it, that sense of ownership fades just a little. The moment becomes shared property, open to judgment, interpretation, even mockery. So those who stay silent are often guarding their ownership over life itself. They keep their moments untouched, private, pure. And maybe that's not loneliness. Maybe it's a quiet kind of freedom. Think about it. When was the last time you did something meaningful and didn't feel the urge to share it? When was the last time you laughed, cried, or achieved something and didn't immediately think of posting it online? that reflex isn't natural. It's conditioned. A decade of likes and dopamine loops has trained us to equate validation with value. So when someone steps outside that system, it feels like rebellion. But it's also healing. They rediscover the simplicity of doing things for themselves. Cooking without photographing it. Traveling without tagging it. Feeling without explaining it. And in that quiet space, something reawakens. A kind of self-awareness that doesn't need an audience. Of course, not everyone who doesn't post does it from peace. Some stay silent out of fear. Fear of judgment, rejection, or being misunderstood. Psychologists call this self-presentational pressure. The constant awareness of being watched, even when you're not. For many, that's exhausting. They worry that their words might be misread, or worse, ignored. So they retreat, not because they don't want to connect, but because visibility feels too costly. They want to be seen, but only truly, not superficially. Ironically, the quietest people online often have the loudest minds. They're not absent, they're overflowing. They just choose stillness over spectacle.
There's a quiet philosophy in that silence. In a world that keeps saying, "Look at me," choosing invisibility becomes an act of self-definition. It's a way of saying, "I exist beyond your perception." They might scroll through others' lives, smiling, reflecting, even aching, but they rarely project because they understand something most don't. Not everything you experience is meant to be witnessed. Some of the most profound moments, growth, grief, transformation, happen quietly, unseen, unposted. And when you've lived through enough of those private transformations, you realize that being unseen isn't insignificance. It's where identity is formed, not performed. That's the paradox. Social media was meant to connect us, yet it often leaves us feeling alone. When you stop posting, you stop chasing digital closeness and start rebuilding real ones. You begin to notice who checks in without updates, who remembers you without reminders. That kind of connection, raw, unbroadcasted, feels heavier, warmer, and infinitely more real. People who don't post live in that space. They build relationships that don't need proof. They find comfort in unshared moments. They let life unfold without turning it into content. Part of this is also about identity security, knowing who you are when nobody's watching. When you're at peace with your own company, you don't need an audience to validate your worth. That's not arrogance, that's calm. And often, those who don't post have the most fascinating stories to tell. They just save them for when you're sitting across from them, not across a screen. Because to them, real connection isn't measured in likes or comments. It's found in shared silence, in laughter that doesn't need witnesses, in eyes that meet without filters. These are the people who carry worlds within them. They process deeply, observe constantly, and understand quietly. They don't need the world's applause. They just need to live. And maybe, in a world desperate to be seen, their silence isn't a flaw. It's a mirror. A reminder that not everything meaningful must be shared. That sometimes, the most human thing you can do is to keep something entirely for yourself. The longer someone stays away from social media, the more they start seeing the world differently. Colors look richer, time feels slower, conversations feel fuller. It's as if stepping away from the noise makes everything real again. Because when you stop performing, you start experiencing. There's a quiet beauty in walking through life without needing proof of every step. You're not thinking about angles or captions. You're just there, alive, inside the moment instead of outside it. And that's something social media rarely allows anymore. But this psychology goes deeper than taste. It's about how our brains process validation. Every time we post and get attention, likes, hearts, comments, our brain releases dopamine. Over time, we start craving that hit. We think in terms of shareable experiences instead of real ones. Now imagine someone who resists that loop, who chooses to disconnect from the dopamine cycle. That's not disinterest, that's discipline. It takes real awareness to resist something designed to keep you hooked. People who don't post often have what psychologists call an internal locus of control, meaning their sense of worth comes from within, not from approval. They don't need the echo of "you're enough" to believe it. And research shows that people who take long breaks from posting often experience higher emotional stability and satisfaction. Because when your identity isn't constantly mirrored back to you, it becomes solid, real. You stop editing your life into something digestible. You live it, fully, in all its messy, unfiltered beauty. That might be the quietest rebellion of all. Staying whole in a world that rewards fragments. Still, silence online doesn't always mean serenity. Sometimes it hides exhaustion. Many once came to social media for connection and left drained. There's an emotional fatigue that comes from watching highlight reels while you're still writing your own rough drafts. You start comparing, even when you don't mean to. You question your worth, even when you know better. And eventually, some choose silence, not out of bitterness, but self-preservation. They realize they don't owe the world a performance. They don't owe explanations for their quiet. They don't need to prove they're happy to be believed. That's one of this generation's quiet truths. We've confused visibility with value. We think to matter, we must be noticed. But meaning doesn't need witnesses. Some of life's most defining moments happen without a single person watching. No cameras, no captions, no audience. Just you. And maybe that's what people who don't post understand best. That privacy isn't loneliness. It's intimacy with yourself. Because when you stop broadcasting every thought, you start hearing your own again. You reconnect with the parts of you that got lost in the noise. Your quiet desires, your unspoken fears, your inner compass. It's not a withdrawal, it's a homecoming. Of course, silence isn't always easy. There are moments of doubt, moments when you wonder if quiet makes you invisible, if you're falling behind while everyone else performs progress. But with time, you realize something beautiful. Your worth doesn't disappear when nobody's looking. It's still there, steady, like the calm after a storm. Maybe that's what real confidence looks like. Not the loud declaration of self online, but the quiet assurance of self offline. Some say, if you didn't post it, did it even happen? But the truth is, the things that shape you most rarely make it to the feed. Your growth, heartbreaks, private victories, quiet acts of kindness. They live in memory, not media, and that's enough. Psychologists call it authentic self-expression, the alignment between who you are inside and who you show to the world. But in the age of filters, that alignment often gets lost. You start living as a version of yourself, curated for approval. So when someone chooses not to post, it might be their way of staying congruent, of protecting the fragile truth between their inner and outer worlds. They don't need everyone to see what they feel to know it's real. They don't need to capture every sunset to remember its warmth. They live fully and quietly. Here's the paradox. Those who live quietly often feel life most deeply. They're not distracted by the performance of it.
They notice what others miss. The way light changes on a wall. The pause before someone speaks. The sound of distant laughter. They are present. And presence, in a world built on attention, is the rarest thing of all. Still, that presence can make them misunderstood. People might call them detached, mysterious, even cold. But their silence isn't emptiness. It's depth. It's the calm that comes from no longer needing to explain yourself to be understood. There's a quiet confidence that comes from not needing to be known by everyone, just understood by a few. And that's what people who don't post know best. They understand that not every truth is meant for the crowd. Some parts of you deserve to stay untouched by algorithms and opinions. Because once something becomes public, it stops being purely yours. It belongs to interpretation, to judgment, to trend. And maybe some moments are too sacred for that. So the next time you notice someone who never posts, don't assume they're hiding. Maybe they're just living. Maybe they've found peace in the quiet corners of existence, the ones not lit by the blue glow of a screen. Maybe they're the ones who've remembered what the rest of us forgot, that being unseen doesn't mean being alone, that being quiet doesn't mean being empty, that sometimes the truest expression of who you are is silence. Because in the end, we weren't meant to be performances. We were meant to be people. And the people who don't post, they remind us of that. Every quiet, unfiltered, beautifully